Hello there. Topic for today is active and passive voice. Active voice means that a sentence has a subject that acts upon its verb. Passive voice means that a subject is a recipient of a verb's action. You may have learned that the passive voice is weak and incorrect, but it isn't that simple. When used correctly and in moderation, the passive voice is fine. In English grammar, verbs have 5 properties: voice, mood, tense, person, and number. Here, we are concerned with voice. The 2 grammatical voices are active and passive. Why does it matter? Strong writing uses active voice. When to use active and passive voice, using the active voice conveys a strong, clear tone and the passive voice is subtler and weaker. Here's some good advice. Don't use the passive voice just because you think it sounds a bit fancier than the active voice. That said, there are times the passive voice is useful and called for. Take "the squirrel was chased by the dog," for example. That sentence construction would be helpful if the squirrel were the focus of your writing and not the dog. A good rule of thumb is to try to put the majority of your sentences in the active voice, unless you truly can't write your sentence in any other way. When to use the active and passive voice in writing, it may sound strange to hear that written sentences have voices, and even stranger to know that there are debates on which of the two, passive and active, is the better option when it comes to writing. This article gives a definition of both voices, as well as examples of situations when each can be used properly. What's the difference between the active and passive voice? Voice refers to the connection between the subject and the object of a sentence, which is linked through a verb. The active voice is so called because the subject of the sentence is the doer of an action that affects the sentence's object. E.g., Julie baked a cake. In the above example, the subject, actor, Julie, performed the action, baked, on an object, cake. The passive voice, on the other hand, is when the object is acted upon by the subject of the sentence. E.g., the cake was baked by Julie. The object, cake, was the recipient of an action, baked, which was performed by the subject, Julie. One indicator that a sentence is written in the passive voice is that it comes with a be verb followed by a past participle. However, it is still possible for a sentence to be in the active voice despite having a form of the be verb in it. For instance, "I am eating a pie" is in the active voice despite the be verb, am. Another clue to look out for is the absence of an object in the sentence, which can indicate that this is written using the passive voice, although it is possible to have an active sentence without an object. When do I use the active or the passive voice? Some people believe that sentences should be written in the active voice whenever possible. This might be because doing so can make your writing more concise. As can be seen in the example above, the passive voice usually requires more words. When improperly written, it can also sound awkward and vague, especially when the subject of the sentence is only implied and not deliberately mentioned. However, this does not necessarily mean that using the passive voice should be avoided at all costs. It actually has its own uses. For instance, many authors use it as a tool in fiction writing. In particular, mystery writers are big fans of the passive voice since it allows them to conceal secrets within their stories. The lack of emphasis on the actor has also made the passive voice the primary choice when it comes to scientific or academic writing. While there has now been a shift in terms of allowing scientists to discuss the actions they have taken in the experiments they have conducted, the science field remains partial to the passive voice in order to maintain a tone of objectivity. This is because it does not put particular focus on individual perspective, and instead looks at the actions undertaken, as well as the results. In writing, always consider whether you should use the passive or active voice. It will depend on what you, the writer, want to convey. If you want to draw attention to the doer, use the passive voice. If your intent is to put the focus on the action, then you should go for the active voice. Why does it matter? Active voice is more direct and concise. Passive voice is usually wordier. Active voice is like watching LeBron play. Passive voice is like watching gum stuck on the bleachers in the stands. Most of the time, you want to use active voice. When would you want to use passive voice? When intentionally trying to hide the subject of the sentence. For example, a politician might say, "The mistake was made by someone." Hiding the subject helps him, her hide the blame. When intentionally trying to minimize the guilt of the subject. For example, a cheating boyfriend might say, "Cheating was committed by me." When passive voice better emphasizes the main point of the message, such as, "Children were harmed by the drunk driver." The passive voice requires a double verb, and will always consist of a form of the verb, to be, and the past participle, usually the n, ed, t, form, of another verb. Example. Active. John baked the bread. Passive. The bread was baked by John. Was as a form of the verb, be. Writers should be familiar with the forms of to be, often called linking verbs, so that they can easily identify the passive voice in their work. Review the forms of to be, am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. Note the forms of to be in the examples of the verb to kick in various forms of the passive voice. Is kicked, had been kicked, was kicked, is going to be kicked, is being kicked, will be kicked, has been kicked, can be kicked, was being kicked, should be kicked. Examples. Passive. The cookies were eaten by the children. Active. The children ate the cookies. Passive. The tunnels are dug by the gophers. Active. The gophers dug the tunnels. How to change a sentence in passive voice to active voice. Here is an example of a business communication that could be strengthened by abandoning the passive voice. An error has occurred with your account, but every attempt was made to remedy it. That sentence is not incorrect, but it does sound a bit stiff and dishonest. It sounds less trustworthy than it could, almost evasive. Who wants to do business with a company that avoids taking full responsibility by slipping into formal passive voice territory? Face the responsibility head-on instead. Own it. We made an error with your account, but we have made every attempt to remedy it. To make that sentence active rather than passive, I identified the subject, we. It was our company that was responsible. If there are any questions, I can be reached at the number below. Here's a tip. What to remember. To change a sentence from passive voice into active voice, identify the subject. The structure of this sentence is weak because it doesn't identify the subjects in either clause. Let's unveil them. Who might have questions to ask? The person being addressed, you. Who will be doing the reaching, by calling the number below? It is still the communications recipient. If you have any questions, call me at the number below. Now you have to label the following sentences active or passive. Louise made the chocolate cake. The chocolate cake was made by Louise. The package was advertised by the travel agent. The travel agent advertised the package. The chain was broken by my brother. My brother broke the chain on my bike. I hemmed the prom dress. The prom dress was hemmed by me. The pencil on the floor was broken by him. He broke the pencil on the floor. Directions. Change the sentences below to the active voice. The statue is being visited by hundreds of tourists every year. My books were stolen by someone yesterday. These books had been left in the classroom by a careless student. Coffee is raised in many parts of Hawaii by plantation workers. The house had been broken into by someone while the owners were on vacation. Rewrite the following paragraph in the active voice. Last summer our house was painted by me. First, the exterior was washed using warm water and a mild detergent. Then all of the chinks in the walls were sealed with putty. After the putty had had a chance to dry, the exterior could be painted. A latex paint was used because it is easy to apply and cleans up with water. A whole week was needed to finish this part of the job. A color was used that was very close to the original color. When the job was finished, a great deal of satisfaction was felt by me. Even my dad said that a good job was done.